I think about all the things I've had to go through in my life, and I'm just like, man, I'm so lucky that I knew that it just wasn't me, that I didn't have to figure this out on my own and get through this. But to what you said, it's already done. Like Jesus paid the price. I'm like, I already know where I'm going to be in eternity. So whatever trials and tribulations I'm going through now, it's small. And in the grand scheme of eternity, like this time on earth is minuscule.
Yeah.
And so, once you like have that kind of perspective, it changes how you perceive the world and the problems. And you're like, why am I tripping because we had a bad month? Why am I tripping because this guy left? Why am I tripping because I didn't get this opportunity?
Yeah. Yeah. I had a day where I lost a company that was worth about $6 to $10 million. So I lost, up to $10 million in an afternoon.
Yeah.
It crushed me. And I ended up taking $1 million loan on my house just to finish projects because of a decision a business partner made where they took the whole company. And I couldn't eat for like 30 days. I got down to 169 pounds, which for me was really thin. It was a great way to lose weight, but not recommended.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I felt so crushed. I had to fly home, sit down with my wife, Kim, who was an orphan, who grew up in a foster home from the age of 8 to 18, and look at my wife and say, I lost everything. And I looked at Kim, buying her a cup of coffee I could no longer afford. And I said, I lost everything. And Kim said, I thought I was your everything.
How old are you?
I was, oh my gosh, I was 50.
Wow.
Yeah, or so. And when she said I thought I was your everything, I thought, who is this person? Who answers like that?
Yeah.
And I didn't have a noble answer. I said, well, I lost my other everything. that finances my everything.
I lost a lot.
and the reason I share this is that in that moment, it felt like I could never overcome this.
Right.
It was just absolutely devastating. And 5 years later, I kept praying and going, oh God, could you just drop like $1 million on me to help me solve this problem? And he never did. And,
he never did.
And 5 years later, I came out of all of that. And what I learned in that is I wanted God to meet me in faith, but he met me in faithfulness. And when I came out of that, I thought, wow, I had the capacity to lose $10 million and not be destroyed by it, not be crushed by it. I didn't know I was capable of this much.
Yeah.
Man, my capacity to risk increased so much. And I thought, I have the privilege of losing that much money.
Right.
Very few people have that opportunity,
Yeah.
And I'm more unstoppable now.
Yeah.
Because now I know how much I can actually go through.
Yeah.
And still come out ahead on the other side.
Yeah.
I think most people never get to learn that.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I've brought this up before where I remember in 2018, I had 70 house flips going on. And at that time, they raised rates, not to the rates they have done recently, but it caused the market to shift and slow down. It was the winter and all this stuff. And I ran into a cash crunch. I had all these properties and running out of cash. And I'm like, dude, what the heck do I do? Like, here's my overhead, here's our payments. And I totally mismanaged this money, like unintentionally. Like I just didn't realize money that was supposed to be used for construction, I was buying more properties with, and just young mistakes. And really what happened was I was like, man, this is like really my first $1 million problem. And I have to figure out how to solve it. And obviously I got through it and, it made a lot of changes from that. And it made me so much better the coming years. And then, I ended up with my first $10 million problem. And it's like, man, how am I going to solve this? And the thing that I remembered while I was solving that was, remember how big the $1 million problem was, right? You got through that. All right. You're at a different scale now, right? If you want to do big things, you're going to get a $100 million problem at some point. And how are you going to solve that? If you can't solve a 10 million, how can you solve 100 million? And to me, it goes back to, there are people who they freak out over $100 problem, right? Because it's a super big deal to them, you know? And it's just like, dude, if you can't solve $100 problem, ain't no way in the world you can solve $1,000 problem or $100,000 problem. And so to your point, it's like, man, yeah, like it's actually, I get to deal with a really big problem and see what my capacity is made of.
Yeah. You know, the flip side is also true with generosity. When Kim and I were first married, we slept on the floor because we couldn't afford a bed. But because we were both people of deep faith, we gave minimally 10% of our income, which was almost nothing.
Yep.
You know, for about 10 years, I never made more than $12,000 a year. I think my average income for about those 10 years was about $8,000 a year, total package.
Yeah.
And so we were just really raking in that money, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, out of that 8,000, we were tithing. And, you know, and then we were probably a couple that gave more like 20-25% of our income. And when we were making 25,000, we were giving 20% or more. And we made, and people always say, well, you know, when I get rich, that's when I'm going to be generous.
No chance.
And I go, not a chance, man. If you don't learn how to be generous when you're poor, you're going to hold down that money. And I know billionaires who give tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And because they're so worried about losing what they have.
Yeah.
And so they're generous in ratio, but not actually like in scale in terms of what they could really give.
Well, they're not even generous in ratio. They're just generous in volume.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Value. Yeah. Like exactly. It looks like a lot, right? Yeah. Because it's more than we make in a year.
Yeah.
And but there's no risk in it.
No, it's not really generous.
And I think that's why it's true on both ways. Like you discover how big of problems you can take on.
Yeah.
But also like early on, you also begin to discover or decide what kind of generosity you want to have in your life.
Yeah. And for me, I was the same way. You know, part of my story was I was a minor league baseball player. And so I made $7,000 a year. So somehow less.
Wow. You're crushing it.
I was killing it. Right. And I got married young and my wife was 21 in college. And so she wasn't working and that was our income. And like you, I was a generous not a generous, I was a minimum tither, but you know, doing it nonetheless off no money. And, you know, I just faithfully always did it. And then, you know, as I made more, it became like the next test of, okay, I'll give you more and let's see how generous you are now. And I remember the first time I ever had to write a $20,000 or not a 20, I made 20 and I had to write a $2,000 check, like on one of these house flips. And I was like, whoa, this is a big check to write. And I remember like the test of faith where God's like, really? Like I just gave you the most money and you're like now saying you're not sure. And I was convicted. I was like, dude, what am I doing? And then so boom, you do it. Yeah. And then, you know, from there, I'm not going to say I was always like perfect. There was always like, well, you know, times are tough and, you know, there's always some excuse, but you know, maybe I could take this money and buy another deal and then I can give way more later down the road. Like you'll make all these excuses. And then it just became apparent to me. I'm just like, nope, every month, whatever it is. And that's what we're doing. Yeah. And it just becomes a habit.
Yeah, it also works really beautifully the other way around in that the word generosity comes from the same word as being generative. And I always tell people, you can't actually achieve your full potential of being generous if you're not deciding to be generative.
What is generative?
It means you're creating wealth.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you have the capacity to create great wealth, but you choose to create less, you're actually stealing because you've been given by God this capacity to be really generative, to generate a lot of wealth so that you could be more generous.
Correct.
And when Kim and I, Aaron and Mariah were really young and we were making about $35,000 a year combined. We're living in LA, which was brutal. And I got a contract or an offer to write a book. But right before that, the church we were going to was doing this campaign. And so my wife, I told her, I said, I think we should give $25,000. Our income was $35,000.
That's generous.
And my wife, who's very competitive, said, why not $30,000?
Oh.
And I said, okay, we have a commitment that we always go with the highest faith. And so we made a commitment for $30,000, had no idea how we're going to give it. I get a call. You did a talk at this event. Can you turn that into a book? And I said, send me a contract. And I was 40 years old. and they sent me a contract for $25,000.
Wow.
So I was right. But so I had never written a book, and I didn't know if I could write it. And I was trying to write this book, but I couldn't type. And I had maybe 20 pages. All of a sudden, this woman walks up to me at the nightclub we were meeting in as a church. And she said, I work for Sidney Sheldon. He's written like 40 novels. And he talks all of his books in. I'm a stenographer. I heard you're trying to write a book. Maybe you could talk your book in and I could just type it.
Yeah.
And she types as fast as a person can talk.
Wow.
So I would drive out to Palm Springs where Sydney lived. And when she got off of work, she would meet me and I would type 2 or 3 hours. I would talk 2 or 3 hours a day. She would type. I wrote my first book in 24 hours. It actually won an award.
Wow.
And we got and I said, don't give me the advance. Wait till I finish the book because I didn't know if I could. I finished the book. They sent me a check for $25,000. We held it in our living room for like 5 minutes, then we gave it to the church. Mm-hmm. I would have never written that book. And then I became a writer and sold over 1 million copies of my books. And I would have never become a writer if we had not made that commitment to give away $30,000. But because I decided to be generous, we decided to be generous, I had to become generative. And so now I'm generating, I'm taking talent and ability that I was going to leave unused. But because I made a commitment to be more generous than I seemed capable of, now I had to match it by becoming more generative. So I look at Mosaic and I go, Mosaic is in the middle of Hollywood. Hollywood gives no money, let me tell you. And, Kim and I have been the biggest givers in our church for most of the 30 years we've been there. And we look and go, okay.
This is coming from all your entrepreneurial endeavors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I go, okay, we're going to be about $1 million behind in our budget. So then I go, oh, great. That means I have to be generative and create millions of dollars so that I can give $1 million.
Yeah.
Because I would rather work and create $1 million than go ask people to give $1 million.
Correct.
And it drives me and motivates me and inspires me.
Yeah.
And I think so it works the other way around. It's not just being generous because, you're being faithful.
Yeah.
It's realizing in some ways it motivates you to be more creative, to be more inventive, to be more generative, and so that you can actually be more generous.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think, in the Bible, there's the parable of the talents and God giving, money to everyone based on their skill. And he's like, hey, you're going to manage 5, you're going to manage 2, you're managing 1. And, the guy with 5 turns it to 10. The guy with 2 turns it to 4. The guy with 1 buries it. And he's scared. He can't manage the money. And, he ends up giving the 1 to the 10.
By the way, it's the only time that I can think of where in a very specific way, Jesus says, you're wicked. Like if I buried a talent and gave it back to God, you would think that would just be maybe uninventive.
Yeah,
right?
You were just, you were too cautious.
Yeah, you were being passive.
Yeah.
Jesus actually calls wicked not maximizing the God-given talent and potential that's inside of you. Because what God has placed inside of you is not a gift to you. It's supposed to be a gift to the world. And so I'm like, don't bury your talent, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because Jesus goes, you lazy, wicked servant.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, we look at like wickedness as what are the things you're doing wrong? But what Jesus says, no, when you don't do the good you should be doing, that's when it's a real problem.
Right. When you're capable of more and you don't utilize it.
Yeah. This kid graduated from UCLA and he goes, I don't know what to do with my life now. And I said, what do you mean? Like, he goes, well, to pay the bills. And I go, you just graduated from UCLA. Your parents put hundreds of thousands of dollars for you to get this degree. And all you want to do is pay the bills. Like you should be asking, how do I create millions of dollars so I could help 1,000 people have a salary, so I could help 5,000 families, so I could help children go to private schools or get a good education. You are a uniquely entitled individual who has the opportunity to do so much good. It would be tragic if all you did was get a job to pay the bills.
Right.
And I actually think that's why I admire you, right? And it's like, I admire people who go, I could get a really good job and make enough money to take care of me and my family. or I could take massive risks, even take massive criticism, and create more than even I thought was possible, so that I could do more good than I could have ever imagined.
Right.
I think we need more people who actually choose to create so they can actually do more good.
I think the problem is, people live with so much fear.
Yes.
And they're like, oh, I don't know if taking this risk is like, you know what? My life's not terrible the way it is. Right.
Yeah.
And I think people get so caught up in, I would say it's just selfish. I mean, at the end of the day, the fact that you might not want to take risk because you're not scared of work or not, and you're just, I guess, like, yeah, you know what? Like, my life's fine the way it is. I mean, to me, it's just selfish thinking.
Yeah. When your life is driven by fear, you are a prisoner in such a small world. One of the things I learned early on is that whatever you fear establishes the boundaries of your freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're afraid of heights, you stay low. If you're afraid of people, you stay alone. And if you're afraid of risk, you stay secure. And one of the interesting things to me is, I think, and early on in my life, it just made this commitment that I would use fear to my advantage. That whenever I was afraid, I was going to move hard and fast that direction. And, and I look back on my life now and I realize, oh, wow, so many people think I was full of courage. They don't realize I had as much fear as they did.
Yeah.
I just used fear to my advantage. And I love graphic novels. And in my back house, I have all these comic books and I have all these posters of Daredevil everywhere. And one of the reasons I loved Daredevil was that he was a man without fear.
Mm.
And even when I was a kid, I just decided I'm going to take on Daredevil's persona. And he was blind. He had what other people saw as a limitation, but he had invisible superpowers that no one could ever imagine. And so I just, in a sense, took on that persona. I thought, hey, other people may not see talent in me, but I have hidden, unknown superpowers. And I'm going to make my superpower being fearless. I have no control over how much talent I have. I have no control over really how much intelligence I have. I have no control over how tall I am or how good looking I am. That's all, outside of my control. I have control over how much integrity I have. I have control of how much courage I have. I have control of how I will deal with fear and whether I will let fear limit my life, or I will use fear as my compass that says, no, that's my next territory to take over.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing I would encourage people is, how can you have faith and be defined by fear?